Hey everyone, today we are talking about No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. That's the name of the book. No one is talking about this. This book, for me, successfully recreates the feeling, the collective subconscious feeling of the internet, but in book format. Never have I ever laughed out loud as much as I have while I read this book. The only book that might have come close in my reading history was when I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when I was in middle school, but it's been many years since I've had this good of a laugh, where I actually felt uncomfortable reading this book in public, or sometimes even next to my partner, because I would just laugh and, I don't know, just feel awkward because of that. But on the flip side, this book also becomes incredibly tragic, especially in part 2, and it really beautifully balances the laugh out loud funny with the terribly heartbreaking. And I think for that reason alone, this book is genius to me, that the author is able to do both of those feelings so intensely and so in such a real way. This deserves all the praise that it's been getting, and then some. So about this book came out in 2021 or 2020. It was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2021. So I'm not sure how that works. Yeah, 2021, and it's written by Patricia Lockwood. She is a poet, and I think you can definitely tell by the style of the book that she is a poet. She is very restrained and purposeful with her words. She's not highly verbose, and that is, I think, a very good thing. Her other books and collections of poetry have gotten good reviews. This is by far her most well-known piece, but now I am intrigued to read more by Lockwood. So if you've read any of her other stuff, please comment below and give me some guidance on that. First off, I want to talk about format and style. So, when you first open the book, you'll note that it is written in these paragraphs that are separated by these 3 little dots, and so it is very segmented out, like such. Sometimes the story in one paragraph connects to the next story in the next paragraph after the 3 dots. Sometimes they don't, or at least sometimes the connection is not overtly clear. I believe Lockwood is trying to recreate the feeling of being online when we get these very different stories put next to each other, and we have to, or our brain naturally is trying to put them together. And we are eventually able to put them together in this book. It is not that abstract. It is one person's story. It is not multiple people's story. But I do think she's trying to mimic that feeling where we are thrown out of context and then have to build context from the information that we are given. For example, when you're scrolling through any social media, you might see your friends post about an upcoming wedding that they went to. And then you might see a world event or a world tragedy after that. And then you might see some stranger's dog that you've never met. And your brain has to put all these things together and how they're related to you. So that's what you as the reader kind of have to do in this book. The author states that she wants to reinvent stream of consciousness style of writing, to better reflect the internet. So the author kind of subsumes this, the main character here, and so both of them call it the collective stream of conscious. So collective stream of consciousness is the new style of reading, and I think the format is trying to mirror that. The style and format can be jarring at first. Roxane Gay, who wrote Bad Feminist and a few other books, I follow her on Goodreads. She said this book feels like, or recreates the feeling of what it means to be, quote unquote, very online. And she's not sure if it'll necessarily make sense to people that are not necessarily very online. I think that's a fair critique. I do think this book successfully distills the feeling of being online in the past 5 years. The past 5 years of being online have felt very, very different. And so, I think in those 5 years we've reevaluated, I think from 2016 on, we've reevaluated what the internet can do and what the internet should do. And so we're at the very beginning of that step. And I think, I'll get to this later, but I think the kind of message of the book is, how do we balance, or how do we better understand our relationship with this new tool, this new technology? So I think Roxane Gay's critique is solid. But I do also believe, if I can have these two contradictory thoughts at once, that this book will stay relevant, even though it distills the last 5 years really well. I still think the language in it, the feeling and the emotions in it, will be relevant 10 years from now, 20, maybe 80 years from now, and beyond. I do think there is some permanence in this that we can't just write off as like today's online culture. There's something larger than that at work. Roxane Gay also states that this book feels like two separate novels, and it's hard to connect the two. That is a critique that I have seen others agree with. That is a critique that I felt while reading at first, but it is also a critique I highly disagree with. I think these two pieces, these two books, two parts of the book, work in balance of each other. They are supposed to be juxtaposing these two different life choices, or these two different versions of life that we have. So this is my non-spoilerly way of talking about the ending of the book, or part 2. I might become more specific later, but I'll give a warning for that. I don't really think you can spoil this book, or spoil most good writing, but I know people care about that. So I think part 1 is all about what it feels like to be very much online. And that's the really, really funny part of the book. There is still funny later on, but this is, unrelenting funny. And then part 2 starts off, you find out right away that there's been a tragedy in the family, or there will be a tragedy in the family. And it throws in relief the maybe hollowness of part 1, or the life online, right? So you have your life online on the internet, and then part 2, what is the real thing that can pull you out, right? The author, in an interview with Gia Tolentino, who I really enjoy, especially this collection of essays, she did an interview with Gia Tolentino, and she talks about how you can't have both. You can't have the online life and the life she depicts in part 2. And it's not a dogmatic book. It's not overly moralistic. The author even says at the end in that interview that she doesn't think there is really a moral to the ending. I disagree, or I found something there at least. But I think she balances kind of these positives and negatives to maybe both sides, or both types of lives. So yeah, a little bit more about part 2. Part 2 is about how a tragedy can pull you out of the unimportant. It can kind of wake you up to what actually is real and what actually matters in life. The author kind of realizes that she was spending all this time in what she calls the portal. The portal is just this blanket statement for anything that is online, any social media, anything on the internet. And what she finds to be the important thing is simply just being there, being present with your family. That it's healing just to be there. Your activities when you're in the part 2 realm, your activities when you're with your family, just being present, might not feel like life and death. They might not feel like the most important things that you will ever do. But maybe they are. Maybe those are actually the acts or the events in your life that actually do matter. But on the internet, on the other life choice, the life in the portal, you might post something or retweet something or at least see something online that might feel like life or death. Instant, important, and greater than yourself. But in reality, that is not the real thing. That is not the important thing that will last longer than you. All that can only be found in the other format of life. So the internet life and real life are actually very, very different. And maybe the author is trying to warn us of the trade-offs, or at least to be cautious, or at least to have a healthier balance between the two. I went into this novel when I read it with almost no context. I saw it referenced in an article, and I didn't really read too much on it. I just skimmed through it. And then I saw it at a bookstore, and it sounded interesting to me. The buzzwords on the back sounded cool. Life online, and the fact that it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. That's really all I knew about the book. After reading the first few pages, I thought this book was a near-future dystopia. I actually thought this was a dystopic novel when I first read it. But then the author starts to reveal and reference things that are seemingly rooted in my reality. She references the 2016 election. She references the Supreme Court and women losing reproductive rights. Or at least the potential of women losing reproductive rights when the book comes out. Or at least more so. Oh, well, anyways. So, while reading this, I slowly realized that this was not a dystopic novel. Or rather, this was a dystopic novel, but it was rooted in today. In now. And that really whiplashed me as well. There was a lot of, I would say, whiplash while reading this book, from the hilarity to the tragic, and then thinking you're reading this piece of fiction, and then everything connects to the last 5 years that you've seen online, and the chaos that has kind of really transpired through that. The ending is incredibly impacting, and maybe one of my favorite last paragraph in a book that I can remember as of now. At least in the top 5. Let's see. It wasn't actually until I read the acknowledgments section of the book after finishing the book that I realized that most of the story is actually also true and something that happened to the author. And when I read that, I welled up a little bit. Okay, I think it's time for me to talk a little bit about spoilers. So I just mentioned that this is actually creative nonfiction. A lot of this is based off the author's life and experiences, but I still think it's classified as fiction and not as a memoir. So I don't really think one can spoil nonfiction, but if you think you can, maybe this is where you want to end the video. Although I think the lesson for the book is coming up, and maybe you want to skip to that. So the author's The author in part 2 gets a phone call from her mom. Something's happened. She finds out that her sister, who's pregnant, is going to have a complication with her birth. They realize that their options are now more limited, given where they live, and that the baby likely will have to be born, but will likely not survive the delivery. So the odds were stacked against the baby. The baby was not supposed to survive, but the baby does. The baby has something called Proteus disease. Proteus is a overgrowth disease where certain parts of your body will continue to grow. The brain kind of, I think, my understanding, forgets to tell certain areas to stop growing. So there's this just continuation of growth. If you know who the Elephant Man is in history, it's also an excellent David Lynch film. I think, ironically, one of his most straightforward movies. But Proteus is what the Elephant Man had. So this baby is born with Proteus. And in the book, I was reading this before I knew that this was real life. And the author says something, I'm going to butcher the quote, but she says that it all struck her one day that her niece might be a metaphor, but then she realized, no, she's a real person. So I read that, and I'm like, alright, this is clearly fiction. What could the niece represent? Well, this book is about life online. Maybe it's about this explosion of information, a lot of this information that we don't need, that just continues to grow without any stop to it. But then, now that I've read the acknowledgement section and seen a few interviews and done my research, I almost feel guilty turning someone that was real into a symbol. It feels wrong, right? This was actually a person, and maybe we should remember that first. So the end, like I said, is one of the most beautiful parts. I'm going to read the last paragraph. You can skip this minute if you don't want to get this spoiled bit. Page 208, the very last paragraph. So, after about 6 months, the baby does actually pass away. This was 6 months more than they expected to get with this baby. The author helps raise the child, becomes fairly motherly to the child. And it's tragic when the baby passes away. The author is giving, or the character that's meant to represent the author is giving a speech at the British Museum. After all this has transpired, she's kind of this expert on online, or the portal, the culture online. And after she gives the speech, she goes to a bar, and there's a bunch of people. It's packed. There's so much people, so many people in there. People are bouncing and bumping into each other, and it's supposed to kind of represent a real version of online culture, of all these ideas bouncing off each other, and this collective group moving as one giant organism within the bar, mirroring how we work more together than not when we're online. And someone steals her phone while she's dancing. Right? She's trying to dance away the pain. So, there's that. Someone at some point slid her phone out of her pocket, and she lifted off her feet. Lighter. Her whole self was on it, if anyone wanted it. Someone would try to unlock it later and see the picture of the baby opening her mouth, about to speak, about to say anything. I just absolutely love that ending. I read that ending at first as this message, like throw away your television, throw away your cell phone, get offline, and improve your life. I'm afraid it's not that simple. Yes, the character feels lighter once the phone is relieved from them. But the author specifically said that there isn't really a moral at the end of the book, or if there is a moral, maybe it's a darker one. So I'll talk about both. So the author said in the interview with Gia Tolentino, yes, the character might feel lighter at the end of the book once the phone is gone, but what do you do when your phone gets stolen? What do you do when you break your phone? How many days do you go without a phone? You likely will get a phone the next day, right? That's what most people do if they can, right? And so it's this temporary disengagement. Just like the tragedy temporarily took the author away from the portal and into the real life, maybe the dark element is that it is almost inescapable, that we have our internet and online selves and culture so ingrained now that it's inescapable, that we can leave it for a time, but we can't ever fully remove ourselves from it. And that might seem pretty dark, right? To make it even darker, what's the focus in the very last few sentences? She's excited that someone's going to, what? Connect with her. It's not that she's excited that her phone's gone, or at least that excitement is balanced with the excitement that some stranger is going to see this photo of her niece. And this is something that she couldn't post. She did not feel comfortable posting it on the portal. It felt exploitative. That's, where the title comes from. No one is talking about this because she feels like she can't talk about her niece. Well, a stranger stole her phone. It's no longer in her control. She can still share without maybe that guilt of posting. She can still get that maybe almost instinctive desire to share with strangers that the internet exploits, and it automates it, right? So I think that is the dark ending, and I think that is very much there in the book. But I like to choose, at least, to look at the book more as a warning, and not as a dark, fatalistic kind of approach to online culture. So the book kind of represents these two separate lives that you could have. One online, one in reality, right? I do think an abject just removal of all things, of the tool and technologies that we've gotten and that bring us online would be maybe a step backwards, right? The internet is a tool. It is perhaps our most complex tool that we have, except for our language. The language that we use is also a tool, right? Our language allows us to do so many great things, but we spend our whole lives studying language, right? We have English language arts in our public school systems all the way into college, right? You have to have an English requirement class in college even, right? Elementary to college, you're still studying it. You're still learning it as an adult as well. You're always reading, you're always analyzing, etc. Why do we do this? Because language is a powerful tool, and unless you understand how to use it properly, it can control you. Well, the internet is no different, right? We study language so that we can control language and be more in control of our brain. Otherwise, the language will start to control us, or other people's language can start to control us without us really understanding how that's working, right? The internet, we're in the early phase of the internet, right? It's not going anywhere. We're not going to destroy the internet, and that's definitely not what Lockwood is trying to say to do. But maybe there is a correct balance in how we use the internet. Maybe we need to study more effective or healthier boundaries and borders that we could put up around our online life, that we shouldn't live fully on the internet, like the author's character was doing in part 1, maybe we can do it more in a balance with a healthier respect. Right? I don't think it's healthy, and I feel like I've seen a lot of discourse on the evil of the internet and what it's doing to our brain. And yeah, there is definite truth to that. But the internet is not a binary good or evil thing. Just as language, our most powerful tool, is not a good or evil thing. It is a tool that allows us to do great good. It is also a tool that can bring great harm. And so I think we need to study this, its effect. I don't know, maybe have a class on it, or a few classes in which we can develop our online brain a little bit better, or the boundaries we place upon it. We're only in the beginning of this. I'm reminded while talking about this of I forget which dialogue by Plato this is, but Socrates as a character in his dialogue warns the people about the invention of language. Not the invention of language. The invention of the written word. If everyone learns how to read and write, we will lose so much, because we'll read things and remember it that way instead of actually building up our brain muscles to actually remember things, right? Right back then, the Odyssey was an oral tradition. People would memorize whole scripts. Without reading it, they would just be told it over and over and over again, and they would memorize the story. And so that memorization maybe will be lost with the written word. Yeah, true. But we've also gained a lot from the written word as well. So, with any tool that great, whatever boon or whatever positive we get from it also has a bane, some negative that it can also bring, right? So I think this moral is most explicitly written. Sorry, not this moral. The author, I don't think, is super clear on this, but I think we can lead one direction. And what I just talked about is my interpretation of the ending. I do think the one instance where, the clearest instance where we see the author's opinion kind of shine through the work is on page 50, actually quite early. In this, the author is giving another speech about online culture, and she's talking to her students, and she says this: "Your attention is holy," she told the class, as her phone buzzed uncontrollably in her back pocket. "It is the soul spending itself," she continued. "Your attention is holy, it is the soul spending itself." I think that's a really important thing to remember and to focus on, right? But in a ironic way, while she's giving this speech about the importance of your own attention and agency, she's being sucked out into another world, right? Her phone is buzzing and pulling her out of that reality. It's hard, but it's not inescapable. Your attention is holy. It's the soul spending itself. Set up those healthier boundaries in which you can be maybe more in control of your soul. All right, everyone. So that's my review. I loved this book. It will definitely be one of my favorite books I've read this year. In the year roundup video. I am now very curious to read other books that mimic or feel like they mimic online culture or the way the internet affects our brain. I have now this itch for that, but I don't know where to start. So if there's another book that you feel like closely resembles how the internet is affecting our culture or our language or who we are, please do share that. All right. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great day.